Welcome back to Game Theory, a smarter way to play. Today's topic, risk versus reward. Case in point, despite an explosion in industry creativity, you might have noticed something a little bit suspicious about many of this season's top titles. They look an awful lot like last season. No mystery there though, Sherlock. More than ever, today's game industry seems to live by the golden rule. He who has the gold makes the rules. But why does everything seem so play by numbers? We asked insiders to add it all up.
The way that packaged good publishing works, the publisher incurs a fixed cost to make a game, and it can vary obviously, but 10 to 30 million bucks. And they plan to sell a certain number of units, so let's just say 1 million units. So they spend $10 million, they sell 1 million units for $60. Well, the $60 is broken out, $12 goes to retail, $12 more goes to Microsoft on an Xbox 360 game. That leaves $36 for the publisher. $10 is the recoupment of the investment in R&D. That leaves $26. And the typical ad spend, marketing spending, is around 15%. So that 26 bucks, declines to 17. They make $17 profit before you factor in their overhead. The margins aren't quite as high as I think most people, consider that, wow, these guys are just making so much money when I pay 60 bucks. That forces the publishers into making bigger bets on proven property, which is really why you see this branding of a Call of Duty.
I mean, it's a lot of the reason that some of the biggest projects are derivative of other projects, like Bruce Willis meets Driving Miss Daisy. Same thing happens in games. If you're trying to explain it, particularly to a backer, why is this going to be fun? It helps to be able to say, well, you see that game over there, it's kind of like that, but it's in space.
You know what you should do before you spend $1 on your game idea? Is build a website with one button on it that says, click to play. And just see if you can get anybody to click that button. So before you go spend $20 million, let's see if you can cause any action on a website anyway. It is amazing how many people end up building that website and no one's clicking on the button.
It's emulating the movie model. In the movie business, everybody wants $100 million box office films because they have to justify their $30 to $100 million spend on making the movie. We used to have movies that cost 10 million bucks to make, not anymore. So the big bets pay off in a big way. The smaller bets are tougher to capture profit on.
Translation, there's no longer room for average or unexceptional anymore. Either you go big or you go home at retail, but that's a risky bet. What about apps and online outings, though? They make smaller, more affordable games possible too, right? Well, yes and no. Unfortunately, with competition fiercer than ever and visibility so low, the odds of trying to strike it big with an unknown title is about the same as trying to do it playing roulette. Just ask the experts.
I think a lot of the development community is excited and confused about really where it should go, because I think it's a very confusing time for people. There's not much stability, and there's a few oil wells that sort of spring up and go over here. Hey, did you hear about the guy who made the iPhone app that was a whoopee cushion? He sold 1 million units, and people rush over there. Well, it's a commodities market. The chances that you're going to do that are very slim.
People expect more. Gears of War 2 had to be twice as big to get the same review score as Gears 1, right? And it's coming on iPhone, where you have two guys working for 2 weeks making a silly little game that did okay, and now you're competing with Activision's Call of Duty game on the iPhone. There's a reason Farmville and Zynga's games are so successful on Facebook, and it's advertising dollars. Not because Farmville's game design is particularly brilliant or that they put a massive investment into it. It's advertising dollars followed by metrics, watching what their users are doing. So yeah, we're all playing much bigger gambles, and that's getting scary. For a studio like Epic, I can't have a whole lot of failures at the $15 million level and continue.
When I founded Revolution in 1981, we wrote our first game, which was called Lure of the Temptress. That game cost £20,000. And we thought that was unbelievable because costs have gone up by a factor of 100 over 10 years. 10 years later, when we wrote Broken Swords 2 or 3 or whatever it was, now we're talking about millions of dollars. And that has had a profound effect on the way that games are sourced.
If we look at what's going on the drama landscape, Infinity Ward and Activision, I think it's indicative of the relationship in general between big publisher and developer, even successful developer. Case in point being, you see a radical chasm between who really got the money and who's been doing a lot of the work. Over the years, it's been very clear that We see fewer and fewer personalities emerging that are visible to the public. None of the big publishers, none of the big film studios really want any single personalities to sort of hold the destiny of an IP that they're invested in or that they've had success in.
Superstar designers, or let's say even superstar producers, the Jades of the world or whatever, I think it's healthy for this industry. I think probably the thing slowing us down from having those superstars, those publishers who don't particularly want to present a superstar. It's funny that you don't see a lot of publishers being kingmakers, but they all want a king.
Having a big developer is not a space I would want to be in. It's a space we chose not to be in. The industry is so risky and so risk adverse that the terms for maintaining that operation are becoming less and less incentivizing, even if you own it, even if it's your shop.
But that's not stopping thousands of enterprising developers from trying. So what's the scene really like for today's independents, and exactly how crazy have things gotten for poor developers?
People are going to look back in absolute disbelief in 10, 20 years when the history books are written, that publishers expected developers to self-fund titles to the point at which it proved that there was no risk, and then they'd take the intellectual property away and pay them a royalty. And actually, a lot of studios have forgotten how to write original games. And so the problem with that means that when publishers then have less requirement for work for hire, suddenly there isn't any work out there.
It has always been hard. It wasn't easy when I was making Crash Bandicoot. It wasn't easy when I was making Ski Craze in 1985. There are some traps in the industry right now, I think, for the developer. One is to grow into the size that makes middle games on the console. That is bigger than, say, $15 million, but smaller than $40 million. That middle gap seems to right now be a financial weak point. And there are a lot of games that are in that target range of budget that aren't big enough to compete with the Call of Duties and the other massive games that are out there, but they're also not small enough that they can recoup with lower sales.
Like in any industry, things got too big. There's too many people making too many games, and I think it happens in movies, it happens in a lot of different kinds of media. And unfortunately, what it really comes down to is at some point there can only be so many studios for so many games.
Chris Taylor and I were just talking about that, is that we've both had successful independent game companies running for a decade or more, but neither of us would start one now because it's just so hard to get moving and really do something you're excited about and take off. I don't know how you do it anymore.
It's very difficult to get products signed to them. I mean, the publishers are consolidating their portfolios. They're doing less and less games, and games are costing more and more. But on the other hand, you're only as good as your last game. And I think that's always been the case. I think now just the stakes are higher, so that the failures are more visible.
Like any proper industry, you have to take all of your problems and look at all of your problems. Planning for not for the next 6 months, planning in the next 3 years, and having a clear reason why you exist and a clear function. It just so happens in the games industry for years and years, we kind of got away with multiple digit growth every year, which allowed us to be not as professional as perhaps we should be.
We often hear people talking and comparing us to films, who are actually, as far as I understand it, more like the car industry. So that's why there are so many casualties, because what you do is you bet the farm for 3 years or 2 years on a product which is hugely technological, which is hugely risky, and which is ultimately a fashion accessory. It's something that's totally dependent on the zeitgeist at the moment that you launch.
One of the tough things about being an independent developer is you get kind of into this thing of you can get stuck making work for hire, doing a lot of work for hire deals. And that's tough because you just become a service industry. It's not like I'm a guy making pools, but I mean it's kind of the same thing. And so you try to do good deals, you try to get royalties and that kind of stuff. But I think the way you get out of the trap really is you got to make your own intellectual property, and you got to think about self-publishing.
Box product is only alive if you are EA, or if you are Ubisoft, or if you are someone who's got those big retail deals. Everyone's been so marginalised from retail, apart from the big guys. There's nothing in it for us anymore. The other 90% of the industry is looked at online, and now there's so many options. No one wants to turn back. Successful studios in the future are going to be two forms. The ones that are first-party stuff into Sony, Nintendo and the like, they will survive at a largish size. And then there's going to be a bunch of small studios that are going to be doing whatever the online platforms of the day are.
Obviously, indie publishing allows games to be built faster and cheaper, and allows more room for experimentation. But from marketing to distribution, let's be honest, it also comes with its own set of challenges. So why should we be excited about it?
We've gone through like an era of hyper-specialization, which I think is over now, where we can have indies making games, we can have smaller platforms like the iPhone or like the Android or web platforms, and that actually is kind of fostering a kind of youthfulness which is coming back.
To say that iPhone games are not games is silly. When I started making games, I would aspire to make something as graphically as complex as today's iPhone games. Same is true of Facebook games, same is true of a lot of other types of games. Are those games going to somehow take market share from AAA games? Absolutely not.
We're seeing a lot of little teams trying to make simple games, and I'm a little worried. That's not really that sustainable. In reality, people want games that are simple and easy to get into. That's because they don't want to spend a whole bunch of time just trying to get to understand the thing. But make no mistake, the games need to be deep. People are making Kleenex games which you blow your nose and throw it away. That's not necessarily a safe place to be betting your money. If your game design document is 2 pages, unless you found the next Tetris, I would start to worry.
Yes, we are seeing a lot of innovation at the smaller scale of games, and then we're seeing a lot of huge bets with pushing the tech and pushing the visuals and storytelling and so forth at the higher end. I think the mid-range actually is fairly interesting because we're seeing larger budget titles, for example, for Xbox Live.
Traditional games developers have come from the model that you ship a game, you work through various stages, alpha, beta, and then you ship the game, and then you go to the beach. And now, begrudgingly, we've moved to a service model without even noticing it. Now you need hosting, and now you need servers, and now you need maintenance, and now you need DLC. Consumers rightly have an expectation that they're buying into a universe, that they're buying into a service. It doesn't need to mean subscription. If you can budget for this up front, then you can actually have a much more evergreen product. And certainly we're still learning how to keep people coming back.
Game developers and publishers need to evolve, change or die, if you will. Our ecosystem is changing. Unless we change with it, we're either going to be marginalized or we're going to be extinct.
Still, as we at Game Theory remind you, the answers are never simple. As this week's homework assignment, we invite you to consider the following questions. If partnership programs are so important to publishers, why can only the biggest, most successful studios actually secure these alliances? Deals still operate based on leverage, so what type can game makers really hope to strike without owning their own IP, fan base, or revenue channels? And just how level is the playing field really when digital download services can limit release slots and hold the final say over what appears on their platforms? Be sure to hit us up at our website, GameTheoryOnline.com, to share your thoughts. We'll see you next time on Game Theory. This is your professor, Scott Steinberg, signing off.